Enslaved women in the Americas faced one of the most brutal forms of oppression in history. Not only were they forced to endure grueling physical labor, like their male counterparts, but they were also subjected to what could be called reproductive labor. Their bodies were viewed by enslavers as tools to produce more slaves, which would ensure the growth of the enslaved population and increase profits. The idea was simple: more babies meant more slaves. While enslaved women were expected to work the fields, perform domestic chores, and labor in the harshest conditions, their bodies also had another purpose: reproduction. Enslavers saw women's fertility as an investment, meaning that having children was not a choice, but a job. For them, it was more economical to breed enslaved people than to purchase them. This led to a system where women were often forced into reproduction, sometimes with enslaved men, sometimes with their owners, to maximize profits. In this cruel system, many enslaved women had no say in their sexual partners. Enslavers saw women as breeding vessels, forcing them to have as many children as possible. Some enslaved women could choose their partners, but for others, the partner was chosen for them. Either way, their reproductive capacity was exploited, and their worth was tied to how many children they could produce. But enslaved women were not helpless. They fought back against this control in many ways, and one of the most powerful forms of rebellion was by taking control of their reproductive futures. Contraception and abortion became acts of resistance. By preventing pregnancies, enslaved women could limit the number of children they produced, and, in doing so, deny enslavers their desired profits. It wasn't just about birth control, it was a way to regain some autonomy over their bodies. Women used plants with abortifacient properties, such as the peacock flower and cotton root, to terminate pregnancies. These plants were often passed down through generations, used as a form of rebellion against the oppressive system. The cotton root, in particular, was well known for its effectiveness in abortion, and its use was widespread among enslaved women in both the United States and the Caribbean. These women were not only trying to protect themselves from the horrors of forced motherhood, but also to protect their future generations from the horrors of slavery. The use of contraception and abortifacients was an act of defiance, a rejection of the enslavers' authority over their bodies and lives. These women were taking control of their most personal decisions, and in a society that wanted to control every aspect of their existence, that was a powerful act of resistance. However, some women felt forced to take even more extreme measures. Infanticide, though tragic and heartbreaking, was another act of rebellion. Under the legal principle of partus sequitur ventrem, which stated that children inherited the enslaved status of their mother, any child born to an enslaved woman would automatically be enslaved. For women who knew the life their children would face under slavery, this law was a cruel reality. In some cases, rather than subject their children to a life of bondage, enslaved mothers took matters into their own hands. Infanticide became a desperate attempt to save their children from the same fate they endured. One of the most infamous cases of infanticide was that of Margaret Garner. In 1856, while fleeing from slavery in Kentucky with her husband and 4 children, Margaret and her family were caught in Ohio. As U.S. Marshals closed in on the family, Margaret attempted to kill her children to prevent them from being returned to slavery. She succeeded in killing one of her daughters and injured the others before being apprehended. Although she faced trial, Margaret was indicted for the property damage of the death of her child, as slaves were considered property. Her remaining children, her husband, and she were sent back to slavery. This tragic event highlighted the extreme circumstances enslaved women were forced to face, where even the desire to protect their children from unimaginable suffering led to desperate acts. Another powerful voice from the time was that of Harriet Jacobs, a formerly enslaved woman, who wrote about her experiences and incidents in the life of a slave girl. In her narrative, Jacobs describes how her enslaver made repeated sexual advances toward her and threatened to take her children away from her if she refused. This constant fear of having her children taken and used as pawns was a painful reality for many enslaved women. The commodification of their reproductive rights meant that even their children were not safe. Enslaved women like Harriet Jacobs were forced to make impossible choices every day, enduring abuse and battling the constant threat of having their children torn away from them. The stories of these women demonstrate that they were not passive victims. They were warriors in their own right, fighting against an oppressive system that wanted to control them from every angle. Whether through the use of abortion, infanticide, or simply refusing to accept the status quo, enslaved women found ways to rebel. They were doing whatever they could to protect their bodies, their children, and their families from the brutal realities of slavery. In the end, these acts of rebellion, though often born out of tragedy, were also acts of defiance. They were a rejection of the system that sought to exploit and control African women, showing that even in the most oppressive conditions, the fight for autonomy and humanity never truly stops. For more videos like this, comment and subscribe.